Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of three amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa the second, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And unfortunately tonight we are not joined by our producer Wes Davenport. He's a little under the weather, and that's why you didn't get the cool intro at the beginning. I don't mess with that stuff. We do have a guest, as you guys can see if you're watching here live or watching on YouTube. But real quick before we introduce him, Omari, we have some ratings, we have some reviews. We had someone shout you out there in person. So first from Apple says, favorite Pistons pod. Omari covers the team very well. Bryce brings some great and interesting perspective to the discussion. Highly recommend these guys. So we appreciate everybody who rates, reviews the pod, like, subscribe, all of those things. And then Omari, apparently you met a fan on the street the other day.
Yeah, there's a store I go to a lot, and one of the guys who works there, shout out to DeCarlo. I actually had my Pistons Pulse hoodie on because I wore it to the practice facility earlier. He recognized me, and we chopped it up, talked Pistons for about 20 minutes. And I go to that store a lot, so I'm sure I'll be seeing you around. So shout out to DeCarlo, big fan of the show. And, I'm just happy that people are still tuning in now that we're like past the trade deadline. And it tends to get a lot more boring usually this time of year. But I guess when you have a trade deadline like they had, it keeps the attention high.
Yeah. And then Will J shouted us out on Twitter. He said he was traveling. Happy birthday to you tomorrow, Will J. He's always popping into the YouTube lives and all of that. He asked about Stanley Amude. We maybe talk about that a little bit later, but we've held off long enough. We are joined tonight by Detroit Free Press's own Shawn Windsor. Shawn, what is up? How are you doing? Coming off a Pistons win. We finally get to see them get a win. Maybe they've kind of been chomping at the bit here, Shawn, with these last couple of games. I feel like they deserve to get one. How are you doing? Thanks for joining the pod.
Oh, doing all right. Thanks for having me. I always love joining you guys. Yeah, they, especially after what happened in New York, right?
Oh man.
Yeah.
And then also the potential travel call on Banchero or missed travel call on Banchero at the end of the game against Orlando. So that was two tough back-to-back losses. Obviously, the New York one was more devastating because if they make that call, they probably win the game. They would have been 3 seconds. No guarantee. Thompson hits both free throws. I think New York had a timeout, so then you're guarded 3. I mean, who knows? With the Pistons' luck, Thompson splits the pair. They draw something up, and they hit the 3 at the buzzer.
Boyan hits the 3, right? Like that would have been the most poetic thing. Is Boyan or Burks hits it?
Exactly.
That would have been amazing.
That would have been something, but no, for sure. The way they played tonight in Chicago was pretty impressive, to be honest. Right? I mean, back to back. I mean, I know New York and Chicago aren't that far apart, but still, young team coming in, showing the fight. They were touch sluggish at the beginning, but I thought the second half was as impressive a performance as they've had all season, to be honest.
Yeah, I was nervous, Omari, them coming off the back-to-back, the heartbreaker to the Knicks that everybody has talked about, and we all know what happened there. Like, it would have been real easy for this team to just be like, okay, like, we don't have it tonight. The energy's not going to be there. They started out okay defensively, but then DeRozan got going there for a while. Drummond was like playing like peak Drummond, all of this. And then I told you guys, I haven't seen the second half yet. I had to go do something before we recorded the pod. I've only seen the first half, but it sounds like they figured it out in the second half and got it rolling.
Yeah, a big key for them late was Simone Fontecchio, who I know we'll talk about here later. But when they went all bench, well, really in the second half, it was bench plus Ausar. But they were able to stay afloat largely because Fontecchio hit some really big shots to open up the fourth quarter. They gave Cade a pretty nice 6-minute rest after he played, I think, 11 minutes in the third. And Fontecchio hit a couple of big threes to help the Pistons stay in control. He had an offensive rebound. And then he spent some time with the starters, too, until Ausar replaced him. So that was a big difference tonight besides Cade, who had 26 points, 9 for 13 shooting. I mean, he's been on fire since we got back from break, but I thought Fontecchio with the second unit really, really looked good tonight, and that's an element they haven't always had this season.
Shawn, what did you see in the second half, or what stood out to you the most? You said you thought it was like maybe one of the better halves you've seen this team play all year. You mentioned this young team, back-to-back, both road games. And in the second half of that back-to-back, both road games, they play really well. What stood out to you? Was there a player? Was there something they did as a team that kind of surprised you or impressed you in that second half tonight?
Well, a few things. Well, first of all, in the first half, when the Bulls went up by, I don't, what was their biggest lead, Omari, 13 or 12 or somewhere in there. Again, it was the all bench lineup, and at one point, I don't even think Thompson was in there, and it started earlier. And I thought that in the third quarter, Monty Williams didn't sit Cunningham until 40 seconds to go or something like that. It was under a minute. And then Ivey, and I'm trying to remember how long Ivey sat, but he stretched it out a little bit better, I thought. And that second unit struggled even in the second half to a degree, but to your point, Finecchio hit a couple of huge threes, I think he had a layup too, maybe knocked a loose ball around. So to me, the biggest thing I thought was their defensive rotations with the starters, and Stewart being Stewart back in the lineup and Thompson out there. And even Ivey had a couple of really good defensive possessions. And I know it's not that, I don't know I'm curious what you think, Bryce. It's not that Ivey just gets lost. It's that when the ball swings to his man, he's never in defensive position. He's almost never ready to defend. And so he wastes all that incredible natural quickness and balance and all those things. But I saw that a few times in the first half. In the second half, they were just a lot more connected defensively, and I thought their rotations were much better, and they communicated better, right? And to me, that's what I thought was probably the most promising thing of all. I mean, aside from Thompson hitting a three, actually hit a couple of them, but he hit a big three late.
Yeah, no, I think the rotations is something that has really drastically improved throughout the entire year. I have it in my notes from the last 2 or 3 games that these guys are like, if they get a double or they get in scramble, somebody breaks down the defense, they are making rotations. They are more on a string. Like you said, especially the starting group, that second unit struggled there for a while. Like Drummond was getting wide open dunks and the rotations weren't as good. I think you bring up a good point with Jayden Ivey. I think what Jayden Ivey has gotten better at, Shawn and Omari, is he gives the second effort. So he still gets beat at times, but then he'll use that athleticism, a second effort to recover, maybe get a block, those type of things. But yeah, he's got to get better just with kind of his attention or focus or whatever it is whenever his man, he still gets beat with a backdoor one time a game. Omari, what did you have in terms of this second half, maybe this game overall, before we kind of start talking bigger picture things, players, Fontecchio. We need to talk about Quentin Grimes at some point. Like all of these, well, we got to talk about Cade Cunningham probably to start, but just what was your biggest takeaway from these 3 games that were very competitive and then they finally get a win on Tuesday night?
Yeah. As you mentioned earlier, they have been chopping at the bit a little bit after they lost the last 2 games, really by, I think officiating errors. Tonight, I think it really was a rotation win, just to see how Monty tightened up in the second half. And I wouldn't say it was flawless, but there was a stretch at the end of the first going into the second where they went all bench. I'm looking at my notes now. It was Malachi Flynn, Quentin Grimes, Evan Fournier, Fontecchio, and Wiseman. And Fontecchio
should
didn't
never
have
see the
best
floor.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Wiseman too.
Well, yeah. Hey, hold on real quick. He's going to see the floor because they just agreed to a buyout with Mike Muscala via Woj, a Woj bomb. Like, I don't know, Omari. We're getting pretty good at this in terms of going live and news breaking because now we've had a trade happen live and now we have Muscala getting I mean, Wiseman's going to keep playing then, right, Shawn? If Muscala's gone and
I don't understand it. I know Muscala's not a banger, but he spaces the floor out and he can at least grab a rebound. And I hate to pick on poor Wiseman, young guy, good dude, tries, wants to be good, but he's got no hands, he's got no feel, he's got no lower body strength relative to his size and the guys he's guarding. I mean, Drummond just punished him on the glass tonight, right? And that's a fairly nightly occurrence. I really do feel for him in a lot of ways, being a number 2 pick and all that, but he's just it's a mess. It's a mess. And the fact that they went with him over Muscala, at least for right now. I mean, I'd be surprised if he's with the team next year. It just tells you what they want and what Weaver wants, right? He
Yeah. So
prizes perceived strength, athleticism, upside over a guy who was spreading the floor. Muscala made them better immediately.
Yeah, he did.
no, and now you've gotten the two guys that maybe could do that, Omari, are gone. And listen, I watched Stu tonight in the first half. He went 0 of 4 from 3 and missed everything short. It looks like he hit a couple in the second half. Is that right? He finally knocked a couple down?
He did.
And so he can provide a little bit of that. But if there was anything that you kind of thought was positive from that Marvin Bagley trade to the Wizards, it was that Muscala and Gallo, even though they can't play defense and can't really move anymore, it was that those guys could space the floor. You bought out Gallo after the trade deadline, which was interesting to me, after you waived 5 other guys to get to 15. And now after 3 games, post All-Star break and deadline, you waive Mike Muscala, or apparently have agreed to a buyout. I shouldn't say waive. I think the Woj report, Omari, says that they have agreed or are working on a buyout with Muscala. It seems like really weird timing to me with both of these, but especially Muscala now. And as Shawn says, a guy that you could find, minutes for in the rotation.
Yeah, no doubt. Muscala came in and just the spacing he provided with that second unit, like it was like night and day. And he clearly meshed playing alongside Ausar, where we see the extent that teams help off of him. And he did hit 2 big threes tonight and a big one last night as well. But I think Muscala helped a lot of that. I'm curious if Danilo Gallinari getting bought out first factored into Muscala's situation, only because they have been traded together, I think, a couple times. And, that probably also explains why Wiseman's been playing over Muscala. I'm assuming that request wasn't made just tonight. They're
sure
in the works of processing it now. So I would guess they had this conversation at some point. But yeah, I think off-season priority for sure has to be big, right? I think you need a floor spacing big. I think Stu is an asset back there as far as being able to space the floor, but he's just not going to get it done by himself. And again, like what Muscala brought this team was night and day. So you've got to put that toward the top of your list for this offseason.
Yeah, and I do think, just from listening to the front office show with our friend of the pod, Keith Smith, I think you have to have been waived or bought out by March 1st to then get picked up and be on a playoff roster. So Muscala doesn't have to be signed with his new team by March 1st, but he had to be off the Pistons by March 1st. And obviously we're getting very, very close to that. Let's move on to some players on the roster, Shawn, some big picture stuff. But I want to start with Cade Cunningham. I mean, this man has been incredible in the 4 games since the All-Star break. I think he's been pretty good even before that. Omari, I know you've been tweeting out some stats at fans and stuff. Like it's not just all of a sudden. But Shawn, what have you seen from Cade? Has it changed your mind on anything? Maybe you've thought these things anyway. Maybe you knew this is who he was. But just thoughts on Cade Cunningham, especially his play recently.
Well, I didn't think he was great when he came back from his knee injury. I mean, he was fine. In fact, if anything, when he came back, Ivey had really been hooping.
Yeah.
For a stretch there, right? And so that was interesting, kind of watching that. And they kind of had to rediscover whatever little bit of rhythm they've ever had. I mean, it's not their fault; they just haven't played a ton together. But he's kind of found his way back. Look, when I watch Cunningham right now, I imagine what he will look like with still another 5 pounds, 7-8 pounds, and better conditioning. He got gas last night in New York.
Yep.
And at some point that's got to change, right? You can't be a big time lead dog in this league on a team that has some goals and gas out in the fourth quarter. So that's got to change, right?
Yep.
And my guess is that will. But if you imagine him with just a little bit more strength and a little better conditioning and then just more experience, there's still, even tonight, he had a couple times he leaves his feet and he throws the ball away, right? I mean, those have to stop. I mean, look, Steph Curry does that occasionally, but that's maybe one of the 2 or 3 most efficient players in the history of the basketball. So that's different. You can live that in a different way. Cunningham's going to keep getting more efficient, I would imagine, because he's just the stronger he gets, the easier he gets to his spots, and he just looks so fluid and smooth. He had a couple of times tonight. You probably didn't see this, Bryce. You didn't see the second half. Omari will tell you. Coming around. No, actually, in the first half, maybe you did see this, Bryce. One time he came around. It's almost like he's in slow motion. He was coming around the left side, just kind of kissing up off the glass with his left
I
hand.
did. Yep.
And it's like the defender expects him to speed it up, so he's kind of paralyzed a little bit. It's a really interesting sort of thing that he's got. It's not just a change of pace. It's a psychological thing about what you expect when you're playing basketball, and he takes advantage of that. And I think he's going to continue to take more advantage of that.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of people question like he can't get to his spots or what. Like, I don't think it's a thing of whether Cade can get to his spots. I think he gets to his spots. It's just it hasn't always been efficient with actually making them. Like, there's too many times he isn't able to finish through the contact. Which, to your point, Shawn, you add 5 pounds to him, and all of these ones we're mad about because there are no calls or he's not getting to the free throw line. He's going to finish regardless. And then maybe as he gets a better whistle, then it's and ones. But I think he gets to his spots. And then over these 4 games, we've seen him make those shots the majority of the time. Obviously, the New York game, like you said, he wore down. I think his defensive energy and effort has shown better in some of these games as well. Omari, your thoughts? I know you've kind of, I don't want to say like had to defend Cade on Twitter recently, but it feels like you've kind of taken that up just like to remind people how good Cade is and has been, and obviously he's really done it this last week.
Yeah, there's been a lot of debate, obviously this season about Cade's ceiling. Is he at number 1 or is he the guy? This and that, and the turnovers have been a pretty big topic. But as I tweeted, I think last week, he's more or less solved. I won't say solved the turnover issues. He could still cut them down a bit, but it hasn't been excessive really since the end of December. And even when he came back from his injury, and I think he had a 6 or 7 turnover game pretty early, you look over the sample size of like 9 or 10 games, and he was still pretty much at his season average. He led the league in it pretty early, and last I checked last week, he was like 18th per game, which is a pretty significant decline, especially considering how much he handles the ball. So I think you combine that, just him being more efficient with the ball, with just how well he's been scoring the ball. I mean, you look at his last 3 games before tonight, and he's like shooting 57% overall, 57% from 3, 29.7 assists, 6 rebounds, 4 turnovers. Like, the turnovers are still a bit high, but you look at other leading ball handlers too, and his numbers really are not that out of whack. He may not be the type of Chris Paul efficient point guard, and there's still room to grow, but it's, for me, it's no longer at the point where I'm questioning if he's a number 1 guy. I think he's showing pretty firmly over the last 3 months that he is.
Well, I think he's at least shown the flat. Like, the potential is there. The ability is there. Can it be consistent? Can he continue to grow and get better? Yeah. I mean, I think when people are talking about trading him or other people being better than him and those type of things, like, I think he's put a lot of that to rest. And as Cade has said, it has to turn into winning. And finally, on Tuesday night, we saw that. We are going to go to a short break, and then we come back, Omari. I would like to dive in a little bit more to like Cade Cunningham playing with Jayden Ivey. How do they fit together? How has the rotations been thus far? Should they stagger more? Those type of things. Obviously, get your thoughts, get Shawn's thoughts. I have some opinions. We'll get into the Cade Cunningham, Jayden Ivey backcourt after this.
All right, we are back with segment 2, and we're just going to dive right into the Cade Cunningham, Jayden Ivey backcourt. Shawn, it's been about 3 months now since Ivey's been a full-time starter, and I think his role has still fluctuated within that, but a lot of the early season, I guess I'll call it angst over how he's being utilized and his standing in the rotation. I think a lot of that has subsided. Just looking at how they played tonight, where they're both pretty efficient, and as a whole, just broadly, what's been your take on how they've meshed thus far?
I think they show potential. Tonight was interesting, and again,
Yeah.
sorry, Bryce, I know you didn't see it, but okay, here's a good example. So the end of the second quarter, there was a shot clock's worth of seconds, maybe a few more. Ivy starts dribbling up the court. I can't remember if somebody passed it to him, if he got the rebound. I don't remember. He took a dribble maybe, and you could tell Cunningham was calling for the ball. So Ivey looks over and gives Cunningham the ball. Cunningham comes up, dribbles out the clock, or most of it, and then gets a pick somewhere near the top of the key, gets over on the left side, I want to say on Vucevic, and steps back and hits a three. And he wanted the ball, he knew it, and he should have the ball. Cunningham should have that first right of refusal in those moments. Unless maybe Ivey's just on an absolute heater like he was in Sacramento or whatever. But toward the end of the game, it wasn't a 1 or 2 possession game. But what I liked tonight in Chicago was they each took turns initiating the offense, 2 or 3 times in a row maybe. And I want to say every time it went to Duren on an elbow, sort of and then he would decide whether he was going to give it back to Cunningham and Ivey. And so there's a nice distribution there, and it's kind of I liked how democratic that was in a way. And you can see that, and I want to say they both made plays. Cunningham, I think, got the ball in one of those handoffs and kicked it out to Thompson for the corner 3. And then there was another time where Ivey got in the lane and dished it to somebody. I don't remember who that was exactly, but you can see it. And that's the thing that I think frustrates a lot of people with Monty Williams is that Ivey can make plays, right? Yeah. I mean, he and when they've had all these all bench units, even in New York. Look, I get it. Don't pull Grimes. He was on a roll. He was in New York. He was feeling it. But maybe you go small for a second and see what that looks like. But not playing Ivey there, right? It doesn't make any sense to sit him for that long. He needs the reps, right?
Yeah.
Especially when Cunningham's on the bench. He needs the reps to me. You got to see what you got.
Well, yeah, I think go ahead, Omari.
No, I was just going to say, and it's odd that we saw Ivey getting more of those on-ball reps before, but now the rotation has more or less been pairing Ivey solely with Cade, right? There hasn't really been much staggering at all in the last few weeks. And, Ivey does not always make the best decisions with the ball, but I think beyond that, he's still proven this season that he's the second best engine on this team after Cade.
Yeah, and I think
neither does Cunningham. Sorry, Bryce.
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, I think what was frustrating for me is I tracked. It was either the New York game or the game before that. I tracked Ivey's minutes without Cade on the floor, and it was only like 5 minutes, and then in those possessions, there was like 33% of them where he didn't even get a touch. So it was just frustrating that yes, these two have to be able to play together, Shawn, but there is part of the success is you don't have to play them together. You can have one or the other on the floor at all times. Let Cade run the show with spacing. Let Ivey run the show with spacing. As you said, he needs those reps to grow anyway. I think that's where a lot of my frustration is it's going to take time for them to reach their peak playing together. And I've stayed very bullish that I think they can, but stagger them. One of them there should be 48 minutes of every Pistons game where one of those guys is always on the floor. Like, I don't think it's impossible to make that happen, or at least close to it. In the minutes when Ivey is on the floor without Cade, the offense should be running through him. So I think that's where I get frustrated at times, is not seeing that, because I do think that this potential backcourt, like, it's huge. Like, and if nothing else, Shawn, you got to figure out if it is going to work, right? Like, we need to get that data of, is it going to work or not?
No question. That's the central question, right? That's the central question with the roster as it's currently constructed. I mean, you can project, okay, is Duren, is he going to get in better condition? We're talking about conditioning earlier with Cunningham. Is he ever going to get in shape? And as he gets older and learns the NBA game and learns to defend, I mean, he's got a lot of defensive issues. Is he going to knock down an elbow jumper? Whatever. That's just him, and that's just reps, and we'll see if it happens or not. The coach has nothing to do with that while he's on the court. You know what I mean? The coach has a lot to do with that in practice, off-season program, all that kind of stuff. But the coach has everything to do with whether this pairing is going to work or not, or most everything to do. And I think it's just driving Pistons fans mad. And I don't normally like to look at it from a fan's perspective, but I'm with you. It's baffling. It's absolutely baffling. Because Ivey, yes, he turns the ball over. So what? You've won 9 games. I mean, the guy makes at least 2 or 3 plays a game that are breathtaking. I'm talking about for somebody else, not just for himself.
Yeah.
He does.
we all watch general NBA. There are other guys that pressure the rim better than him, and obviously are more efficient when they do so. But the list isn't crazy long, Omari, Shawn, of guys who can get into the teeth of the defense, break the defense down, and do it somewhat easily. Like, Cade doesn't always do it easily, even if he does get there. Shawn, Jayden Ivey gets into the teeth of the defense about any time he wants. Now, is he going to make the floater? I don't know. Is he going to make the right decision? I don't know. But there is something to that, and there's a lot of value in a player that can do that.
He had a couple times tonight where his getting in and collapsing led to buckets, right? And look, I get it. He fumbles the ball every once in a while, but Omari, you know this. You watch him all season long. What does he want to do when he gets down there? He wants to make somebody else make a play for somebody else. He's incredibly unselfish.
Yeah, he is,
and he works really hard and he cares. And I don't know why you don't reward that.
Yeah, I think we're really asked to it.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Shawn.
Sorry.
No, I was just.
No, go.
It's frustrating, right? Yeah. It's just, and there's nobody else on the team who could even come close to replicating that, right? Like, you look at the other ball handlers on this team. Like, Sasser's played well, but even in that, when he's the only guy in that group who can really create his own look, I just think it overtaxes whoever has the ball in their hands. Like, you could play Sasser and Ivey. You could play Malachi Flynn and Ivey. I think it's been hard to understand why it's always an either or proposition when those guys is buying. Like, they're not bad players. I mean, they could make plays. Flynn, I think, has probably exceeded expectations just in some of the shots he's been able to hit to keep those units afloat, but it's not better than just having Ivey on the floor, right? So it's just odd that Ivey usually subs out like 7 minutes into the game and then Cade comes out 11 minutes later.
Isn't that the long? Isn't this about the long game though? I mean, he made a play tonight. He swiped the ball. It was in the second half. Sorry, Bryce. he swipes the ball. He's sort of near the sideline, maybe free throw high near the sideline. It was a pass down to the wing. I don't remember who it was. He swipes the ball, and it may have been Caruso who was in front of him. Somebody was in front of him. You remember this, Omari? He's ripping up the right sideline with his left hand. And he wraps it around his back as soon as the defender meets him. And it was almost a full-speed wraparound. And he gets down, and then all of a sudden he's doing a little almost Deion Sanders high step with the ball, and he's not sure because he's so fast and he's so excited. He ends up sort of fumbling the ball, but kind of recovering and then making a pass, and it's a bucket. It wasn't the prettiest at the end, but the handle and speed and balance to get around that defender with that wraparound, it was breathtaking.
I tweeted the other week that it was a stat. I forget the exact stat, but it showed that just how good Ivey was at pressuring the rim. Like, I think just his one-on-one ISO numbers are like really, really good. And he's not taking as many attempts as you would expect from somebody who's been as good at it. But I tweeted, he's doing this really just off of his first step because his handle still has a good way to go. And people were like, his handle's not that bad, is it? He doesn't have a bad handle, but you see.
No, it's not.
It's not bad by any means, but if he tightens that up, like, you're just talking about like 10% improvements here and there that would take him from like an above average guy to like really knocking on being a star. Like, it really would not take a lot of improvement to me for him to get to that point just because of how quick he is.
No, if he tightens that handle up a little bit and the shooting that we've seen that's been better this year, his ceiling is as high as Cade's to me. And
because the shooting, absolutely, right? If he can knock down catch and shoots and force closeouts, good luck to anybody staying in front of him because you're just not going to be able to do it. And then it comes down if he's able to actually finish, make the right decisions. I love that you called him unselfish earlier, Shawn. Going back to my scout on him when he was at Purdue and I was just doing general NBA draft stuff, I was like, this kid is not selfish. He may make the wrong read sometimes, but this is not a selfish basketball player. And I thought his passing was underrated going all the way back to then. And I know we critiqued his defense earlier. He has gotten better defensively though. Now it was a catastrophe last year as a rookie. So it was only going to go up, but the effort, if nothing else, has gotten better. We've seen him make an impact. We've seen him make an impact on offensive boards. I've said, like, he's found a way to win on the margins, Shawn. And so the fact he's doing those things, and he's a great teammate, he doesn't pout whenever he sits the whole fourth quarter at Madison Square Garden. He should get rewarded in all of these other situations because he's doing everything else right, even if he misses the occasional layup or makes the occasional bad read.
No, I'm. Oh yeah, you can't. I mean, you can't coach everybody the same, right? And I know Monty Williams knows this. He's a smart guy. You know, he's had a lot more success than any of the three of us have had coaching in the NBA. And it's easy to sit here and you know, and coach from the couch or from your office or wherever with these mics. I get it, but I just, you know, from what I've seen, what you hear, whatever, you know, Omari hears stuff too, right? It's just there's been some stubbornness from Monty Williams in terms of how he's connected. I think it's gotten better, right?
Yeah,
and to Monty Williams,
so,
and to whatever else you say about him, and I know the fan base wants him out. I'll say this: they are still playing hard. They've won 9 games, and they're still playing hard. Monty deserves some credit for that.
Yeah,
that's not just the players.
They're not coming out publicly like upset, talking against him, like anything like that. Like at the end of the day, you know, we just saw Jacques Vaughn get fired probably for the sole reason of losing the locker room, not just losing games, but it sounded like he lost the locker room and lost his players. You guys would know this more than me, but like at least publicly, I know there was something with Cade the other day that everybody was tweeting about. I didn't get the full context on that, but like they're not coming out publicly making comments like some of the Nets players were about Jacques Vaughn, Omari. So, I mean, again, everybody wants to crush Monty Williams. I think there's some things that he does well. I like some of the sets he runs. The defense has gotten better, whether that's him or somebody on the assistant coaches. The rotations is the frustrating thing, right, Shawn? Like that's the thing. Even the starting lineup, like I usually don't tweet about this stuff. We saw the starting lineup as like, I don't agree with this starting lineup. I understand you have to start one of Ausar or Stu. I think there's no reason to start both of those guys with Jalen Duren at the 5 and Jayden Ivey. Like I didn't understand that. So what about, where are you at? We've talked about the Cade Ivey rotation, Shawn. Let's just start here. What did you think about the starting lineup tonight of Cade Ivey, Ausar, Stu, and Duren?
You know, I was thinking about this, and I know that a lot of folks in Pistons Twitter were frustrated with the starting lineup, and they want to see either Finecchio or they want to see Grimes, whatever. I didn't mind the start. To me, he can play with he can play with that a little bit. It's the flow of the game, it's the rotations through the flow of the game that I think are the bigger issue. Their starting lineup tonight was good. Now Chicago can't score. I mean they can't shoot. So is how much it was
from 3.
Yeah, how much is it the defense? How much was that the defense? I don't know how much that the defense was. Yeah. You know, you can make an argument. If Stewart's going to hit threes, and Thompson's going to hit 1 3, and Thompson actually had a lovely little sort of he went across the lane and turned around, kind of, you know what I'm talking about? Omari jumped up and maybe like a 6-footer. They looked pretty smooth. I was like,
he's going to that a good amount.
That every time won a game, that's his shot.
Yeah. It's just so odd that he struggles with threes so much. Yet he has that turnaround midi like down pat. Like
So maybe you see what the connection is and the rebounding and hey, the way they were rotating on defense. I mean, that's by far their best defensive lineup, right? Yeah. Unless you want to say Grimes for Ivy,
correct?
Maybe.
Yeah.
You know, Grimes may be a better. I mean, I shouldn't say maybe Grimes is a better individual defender right now.
Yes.
But you lose too much to me in playmaking and the shooting's a wash. Ivy's just a lot more dynamic to me than Grimes.
To me, the upside with Grimes is that you could play him with Cade or Ivy. And I think when you stagger those guys, it puts less playmaking pressure on Grimes. But when you put him alongside like a Malachi Flynn, I just think that puts more pressure on that backcourt.
Completely agree. He didn't look good though.
Grimes is like the perfect off guard for those guys, though.
Yeah, he struggled tonight, right? When he had too much, he's like, oh, I've got the ball and I got to make something happen. That's not really his game.
you have two guys, and I know people are going to say Sasser averages a good amount of assists, but at the end of the day, I think what Sasser does best is Sasser creates shots for Marcus Sasser. That's what he does best. The two guys who really can create shots for other guys are Cade and Ivey right now. And so I realize all roads continue to lead back to the same conversation. I realize I'm the biggest Malachi Flynn person in Pitt. Everybody else doesn't even want him to play. I think Malachi Flynn is a perfectly fine backup guard in the NBA for this Pistons team. I know he's not going to play when Sasser, but I'm not saying put the ball in his hands and make him the sole creator. I'm like, hey, you play him off Jayden Ivey? That's okay. You play him off Cade Cunningham? That's okay. But to your guys' point, playing Malachi and Grimes, and then also you put Fontecchio in a situation where he's not the most successful. I think my issue with the starting lineup was why isn't Fontecchio still in this? I just thought he was a perfect fit for the starting lineup.
And that's the question. And real quickly, Omari, the domino of that too, to me, is if you put him in for Stewart, I would put him in for Stewart instead of Thompson. Sure. And then Stewart's your backup five, and then Wiseman doesn't need to play.
Perfect. I think I said initially I didn't want either of them to start, but then I didn't have an answer who the fifth starter was after Fontecchio. So it's okay, I think what you said, Shawn, is probably the right answer. Start Fontecchio with Ausar, and then now, especially with Muscala gone now you can play Stu as the backup five, and then you just rock from there. So that's where I would be. Omari, any thoughts on rotations, the substitution patterns, the all bench lineups, those type of things before we kind of get into some other stuff?
Yeah. I know that the question coming into the night was when Isaiah Stewart comes back, how does that impact the rest of the forward rotation? Just given that it's kind of wild. Isaiah Stewart's last game was January 28th, and he came down to a completely different rotation, like a completely different team. And even though Fontecchio came off of the bench and he wasn't as impactful in the first half as he was in the second, but he was rolling in the fourth quarter. He did end up playing alongside the starters, except it was in place for Ausar. So you had Fontecchio, Stu, Duran, and then, Cade and Ivey, obviously, which I don't think that was discussed as much, maybe among fans, the possibility of, or actually it was people were let's try to get as much shooting as possible, and then you could go 4 out. So Monty actually did that in the fourth quarter before he brought Ausar back in. And Ausar had some good plays tonight. He knocked down threes. I thought that was fine. But, I thought that was curious given that he had that lineup out briefly, I think, in the third period, and then he brought Grimes out, and then he didn't really stick with it. So to go back to it, going forward, I'm wondering if that's just because Fontecchio is playing so well, or if that's in Monty's mind, he is trying to get those spacing lineups out there on some level.
So I want to talk more about Ausar Thompson, because I think sometimes this can come off as disrespect towards Ausar, or we don't think he's a good player. I think it's just the context of the rotation. So we're going to take a short break here. We'll come back for our final 15, 20 minutes. If you guys have any questions for Shawn specifically or us in general, we'll answer those over the last 10 or 15 minutes here. But Omari, when we come back, let's go directly into Ausar Thompson, kind of his game, what we've seen and what we see moving forward from him.
All right, we are back with segment 3, and we're just going to dive right into Ausar Thompson here. It seems like he's gotten back to being Ausar after, I think he hit a bit of a rookie wall around December when he had that broken nose. Shawn, when you're looking at Ausar, and, of course, the three-point shooting has to come along, but just everything else he's been able to sustain this season, playmaking-wise, rebounding, what stood out to you tonight, but then also coming into this game about him?
The fact that he desperately tried not to bite on DeMar DeRozan's pump fakes, which is really hard to do. And he
only got him once when I saw. Was it just one time?
Well, he got him one more time, but it was maybe a questionable call, actually. Remember at the end of the third quarter? No. Was it the end of the third quarter? It was down near the baseline of Mari.
Yeah, that was the end of the third. He got him right as time expired. It was
and Thompson didn't leave his feet, but he left his heels, so to speak. So he got up on his tippy toes.
I thought that was a dicey call.
And moved just a little forward, and the ref was right there. His hands were already up when Rose went into his shooting motion. Yeah, that could have been a non-call at all. I'm with you. He's looked better. I think of him as a connector a little bit. on both ends. Maybe not defensively as much because he's just so good on the ball, but he's a difference maker defensively.
Yeah,
already.
Yeah.
What did you think coming in? Because I didn't think he was going to be this good as a rookie defensively. I thought he had a lot of bad habits coming out of OTE. And I feel like, and I've said this before, that he was able to rid himself of most of those bad habits while keeping most of the positives, which obviously a lot of that comes with just insane. Like he's a top 3% athlete, day one in the NBA. I've just been incredibly impressed with what he's done defensively. He can be a little bit disruptive. Obviously, he rebounds, but he takes tough matchups. I guess my question: is this way beyond your expectations for Ausar defensively so far, Shawn?
Not necessarily. Not after, and I know Summer League doesn't always translate, but after getting an up close look at him in Vegas last summer, and just his feel for everything. And I know he's got a lot to learn for sure, but the way he's gotten into some of the best scores in the league, you've seen this, Omari, right? I mean, he doesn't shut him down, but he stones him.
He's a pest, yeah.
From time to time, right? I mean, basketball is meant to you're meant to score, right? I mean, you're 100 points a game. Hey, they scored 95 points a game. That was a good defensive effort. That's a low amount of points. So yeah, the best scorers are going to score, but he's just. That's why I don't mind him in the starting lineup, and I like the chemistry he's got with Cunningham to a degree. Looking for the lob, Ivey looks for him. I just feel like they're connected, and to me, to your point, Finecchio coming in spaces it out a lot more than Stewart. Now maybe you lose a little bit of rebounding, and Finecchio, I saw his comments after the game that he wants to work on defense. He feels like he's got to provide a little bit more there. He's not going to be as defensive minded as Stewart, but how good is Stewart defensively? Let's be real.
I mean, I think he's better than Fontecchio at least.
He is.
But I think Fontecchio's been good. I put it in my notes, and again, I only got the first half. Like I thought he struggled tonight with the DeRozan matchup. Stu's thing is, I think Stu is a really good defender as like a 4-5. So like you play him as a 5-man, and he's very switchable as a 5-man. That's not as intriguing if you're just straight up trying to like match him up with somebody. Does that make sense? Like whenever he's a switch big, that's really valuable I think they started him on DeRozan tonight. Am I crazy here? I'm pretty sure that was his matchup to start the game. That's a lot different.
A good match. That's not a good matchup. No.
That's a lot different than starting him on Vooch, and then he's able to switch when he needs to. Yeah. So I think that's where I think Stu is a good defender. But again, I think he's a really good defender if he's playing as the third big off the bench.
But there are also some matchups he dominates. Like he does such a good job against Kuzma. Like he defends Giannis actually pretty decent. There are just specific matchups that he really does shine.
Well, like Paolo would have been a good matchup for him, right?
Absolutely,
and that's where it's a little bit different. I think it's going to be the same with Fontecchio to an extent where he's going to have I think that's where Ausar, Shawn, Omari could end up being like really, really valuable. Is he's twitchy enough to guard smaller players.
Absolutely.
And then eventually, because YouTube user says the only thing that bugs me about Ausar is when he gets shouldered and goes flying. When he gets stronger and puts on a little more weight and all of that, then he's going to be able to take these bigger matchups that we've been talking about with Stu and Fontecchio. Like Shawn, that upside is really valuable.
Well, no, what you see, what you see from him in the future, maybe even next year, is whoever the best perimeter scorer is, whether it's a 6'3" guard or a 6'8" wing, that's who he's taking every night. That's who he's got, right? And then you roll the domino. I mean, you figure it out from there. To me, that's the key. It's like before Klay Thompson got hurt. Now I think Thompson's going to be even better than Thompson. Asar Thompson's going to be better than Klay Thompson was at his peak. But what a luxury that was. Defensively. Yeah, what a luxury that was for them defensively back in their peak years, right? Well, he's 6'7". Asar is much twitchier than Klay, but that's what I see. Klay used to guard Kyrie and then DeRozan, right? So.
Well, and the thing that does is think about the pressure that takes off the Cade and Ivey backcourt, right? In terms of those guys never, ever, ever have to guard the other team's best player, Omari. So, I mean, and Nate asked this, so I'll go to you with it, Omari. What do we think about Ausar's ceiling offensively? Love his defense and rebounding, but if he can't shoot, so Omari, where do you think he can get to? Where does he have to get to make this really be a net positive? Because as good as the defense is right now, the offense is questionable enough that like you could argue that it ends up being neutral or even a negative with the floor spacing.
So the shooting obviously is a big one. I think no matter how good you are on offense, like if you're not on defense, it's just really tough to thrive in all lineups as an NBA wing when you shoot that poorly from three. And the Pistons have made it work, and I think Ausar does a lot of other stuff to help make up for that. But the shooting is still, in my mind, the forefront. I want to see him tighten his handle a bit. I think he's a very great connective playmaker. You could see him, attack closeouts and things like that, find open man. The handle's got to tighten up a little bit. And I'm curious to see if he can really expand his game from mid-range. If he's not going to be a knockdown three-point shooter, can he at least add on to that turnaround jumper he has? Because he does so much good stuff, but I think he is the perfect test case of how good could a player of that archetype be without a jumper. Like there's just so many wings in the NBA where that was their swing skill. Look like Isaac Okoro, those types of guys. Like Ausar's exceeded my expectations in a lot of ways, but I still think they're always going to have some roster issues and some fit issues as long as he's shooting that poorly from three.
See, to me, the key to him with this roster is Jalen Duren.
Sure.
If Duren can shoot,
yeah,
and he's got nice form at the free throw line. That doesn't always translate, but you can, right? He's got a good feel. If he can knock down an elbow jumper or a 14-foot wing jumper, whatever, if he can at least, if the defense worries about him, if he's 4 or 5 feet outside the paint, 6 feet, 7 feet outside the paint, then that helps. Then to me, you can have one guy that can't shoot.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, like I imagined Ausar being like the perfect big to play next to like a Jaren Jackson Jr. or somebody like that.
No, for sure. No, just think of him as a big who's great defensively who can't shoot.
Yeah.
But Duren's got to be able to provide offense.
Yeah. You got to have the right 5-man to do that. I was talking about the Rockets the other day and a Min Thompson who also can't shoot, but because Şengün is such a like hub of the offense, can pass, all of those things, like it seemed to make a little more sense. And so I think can you make a 15-foot jumper, Shawn? And then I think Duren can pass, but man, he makes a lot of questionable decisions right now as well. And so it is, I don't know that you can ever play these four together until either Ausar learns to shoot or Duren is able to do some of these things offensively like you're talking about.
No, for sure. Think about it this way with Ausar. If you swap him out for Aaron Gordon, do the Nuggets still win a title? Absolutely yes. To me. That's the
him as an outlet with Jokic, that's
no. So then if he's surrounded by Jokic, Murray, and KCP and Michael
Porter Jr.
Michael Porter Jr. Yeah, right. He's got to have 4 shooters around him, And then to me, it's. But I don't know. We'll see. That's why Finecchio.
Yeah,
it's got to be out there for one, and then we'll see what Duren.
Okay, so we got a few questions in, guys. If you have any for us, ask them now because we're going to go through these and then we're going to shut it off. It is almost midnight Eastern time. It's a little earlier for me, so not too bad. Philip Bender says, is Stu really the answer at the 4? So we've talked about this a little bit. Long-term, Shawn and then Omari, do you think Stu is what is he going to play a higher percentage at during the peak years of his career as a successful NBA basketball player, Shawn, at the 5 or at the 4?
Depends on who the general manager of the Pistons and who's the coach, right? I mean, because they that's how they see him. Weaver was adamant about that.
Yeah.
Last time we talked to him, I want to say, right, that talking about Stewart, because I asked him about big man and shooting, and that was before I knew he was going to get rid of Muscala, but I'd point out that they made, the differences when he's starting to rethink a little bit because, you hear things, you're told things about his stubbornness that way. And, of course, he gets rid of them. So I don't know. They love him. And I wonder if and I understand why. He's a good dude, great presence, all that. He's tough. He helps the team, and he's good for the locker room, and he's good on the court. But are they in love with that too much? What do y'all think? Are they in love with that a little bit too much at the expense of modern basketball?
I think they're. Oh,
go ahead, Bryce.
I was just gonna say real quick. I think they're in love with it too much with him as a 4-man. I would be perfectly fine if they loved him for all of those reasons. And again, played him as the third big, where 70% of his minutes were at the 5, 30% were at the 4 against certain matchups. So that's my thoughts, Omari.
Yeah, I think Stu is an answer at the 4. Like I've said this on the pod, I've said it before. I think he's the exact type of big you want in the playoffs when teams tend to go smaller. And you have somebody out there who can rebound, shoot, provide some physicality. Like I think he's perfect for that. But that's a rotation big. And I think when you have a team like the Pistons are constructed now, where he probably slots in perfectly at the 5, like we talked about earlier, you could just take Duran out and then just shift Isaiah Stewart up. And then you have these power forwards like Fontecchio, who could come in, Ausar, and fill those minutes. That's not what has been happening. So, I look at it from that standpoint. And go ahead,
or
Shawn.
next to a stretch 5,
or next to a stretch 5, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
It's not. They're not capitalizing on all of Isaiah Stewart's strengths because they're playing him out of position to an extent. Because I think there's stuff he could do at the 5 that they could actually benefit from some nights.
All right. So Derek Brown asks he says this team is a lot more fun to watch after the trade deadline. So I'm going to turn that into a question, Shawn. Do you agree with that? And do you think we continue to see this team grow for what we have seen from the Pistons this year, right? Like there's always context with this. Like, I mean, crazy enough right now, they don't have the worst record in the NBA, I believe, at time of recording anymore. I think they're tied for the worst record. Do you think this team will be fun to watch the last month and a week or whatever we have left?
Absolutely. I think they're fun to watch right now. Now, you got to be a hoop head a little bit. Look, casual fans aren't casual fans around here, Michigan or whatever, who's ever lived in Michigan, loves the Pistons, living in Arizona, they're maybe not going to check in. And I understand that. I respect that. But they're fun to watch now, and they should be. What I like about the trade deadline, Grimes is interesting. Fontecchio, I think, is a good fit. But what I really like is that, and you saw this tonight, whatever else we say about Stewart in the starting lineup right now, they are leaning in and seeing what they have with the 5 guys they think are their 5 most important players.
Sure.
And that's at least makes some sense.
Sure.
You can quibble about should it be Fontecchio. Maybe some people want Grimes in over Ivey, which I don't agree with, but I at least understand that. But they were basing that off of fourth quarter New York. But I think that is worth something. See what you got. And the deadline, it got rid of Burks and Bogdanovich, and hey, those guys are nice professional players, but they were getting in the way a little bit of this. You need to see what you got.
Yep, I love it. Omari?
I'm set. I think we touched it.
All right, last one here. Our music from Twitter says Cade is done not participating in All-Star Weekend. So I don't know if this means he specifically will be an All-Star next year, but guys, how close are we to Cade Cunningham, NBA All-Star level of a player?
Yeah, I mean, if he keeps up what he's been doing over the past few months, and the All-Star discussion is tough now just because the NBA is so deep that there's guaranteed to be multiple snubs every single year. So, I look at it more so as Cade being like at the forefront of the conversation. Like if this is a true turning point for him, then I think he will be in that conversation every year from here on out. Whether he actually gets in, of course, depends largely on the Pistons record. But yeah, a guy who's averaging 23 points, a very efficient 23 points, primary playmaker, hitting the big shots he's going to be in that discussion, especially if he can maintain some of the defensive intensity we've seen at times, but I think has waned at times as well.
Shawn, you get the final word here. Cade Cunningham, future All-Star.
I think he is a future All-Star, just not next year. Jamal Murray wasn't an All-Star this year, right?
I don't think he's ever been an All-Star.
Which is sort of ridiculous, right? When you watch him play in the playoffs, I mean, what he did last year on the way to the title. No, I think unless he comes out and scores 30 points a game and you just sort of have to force the hand, and I don't know that I see that next year. Maybe 26 next year, you know what I mean? Yep. Which will, to Omari's point, get him in the conversation. I do think he's a future All-Star, though, and I'm glad he's starting to play defense a little bit because he played better defense as a rookie than he did the first part of this year. Mm-hmm. And that's important. That's important. He came out of college with a rep for being a pretty good defensive player. Not like Thompson, but a good defensive player. So,
yep. Yeah, all around player. And at times we haven't seen that all around game from Cade. All right, guys, we got to record immediately after a Pistons win, which isn't something we get to do very often, Omari. We broke news on the pod yet again. I mean, if Pistons fans want news to break, we should just go live. And, of course, we were joined by our man, Shawn Windsor. We always appreciate it. Always a great episode when he joins us. Thank you to him. Omari, take it away, my guy.
Absolutely. Big thanks, as always, to Shawn for joining us. We'll have to have you on again soon as the season winds down here and we get closer to draft season. So big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirkley Crawford. And then shout out to Wes, who will join us again next week. And we'll talk to you all soon.